welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am really excited to kick off this series. As I've sort of penned 2026 is going to be the year of curiosity. I'm curious to just learn from others that I think are really, really good in the dairy and animal monitoring space. And that's why I wanted to reach out to you. So is Bethany Dado-Senn Vita Plus to help us learn and explore and be more curious on animal monitoring as it specifically relates to calves.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite, Brandon. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Bethany, and I am a calf and heifer specialist for Vita Plus Corporation. We are a regional nutrition company based out of the Midwest. And so I support dairy farmers on a day-to-day basis. I cover northern Wisconsin, all of Minnesota, into South Dakota and Iowa as well. And my day-to-day role is helping them troubleshoot anything from calf management to calf nutrition, behavior, and health alongside with the veterinarian. And I'm just really excited to be a calf specialist in this day and age. One, because calves are such a valuable asset to a dairy, whether you're talking about your typical Holstein replacement or other breeds, I shouldn't leave them out, or if you're talking about your crossbred beef on dairy calf. Both have a lot of value to dairies right now, and that means that we are approaching managing them at a whole new level, be that exploring different technologies, different planes of nutrition, or training in a new set of employees to really get the right kind of calf that we need for our operation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this whole conversation sort of spurred. You are really active on social media. You do a phenomenal job, by the way. My camera skills are not quite as good, nor as I. But as it relates to one of the posts that you put was that the three things you're most interested in, somewhere along this lines, and one of those three things was animal monitoring wearables, which piques my interest, and that's where we started the call. Maybe briefly, why? Why did it make your top three, and what's got you most excited about animal monitoring wearables?
Yeah, Brandon, actually, it was number one of all the ones I
Ooh, there we
listed
go.
because I am very excited about it. For those that aren't familiar, the wearable monitoring technology has been on the market now for probably about a year or two, depending on which software you're planning on using. But I have just seen a lot of chatter, both on the industry side and on the farm side about this. And I'm particularly excited about it because I think it blends my main goal, which is blending dairy science with dairy management. So my background was at the University of Florida and the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I studied the impact of heat stress on dairy calves. And that was a really cool program because I got to look at general physiology of calves, but also their behavior. And it is so fascinating how conserved this behavior is in dairy calves across the continent, across different ages. They express certain behaviors, certainly at different percentages of their time, but they express certain behaviors that tell us how they're doing. And it's basically how they communicate with us. And so we can take that scientific mind in how we analyze this behavior, but then that management heart and processing that data in order to make management decisions that are best for the calves, but are timely for our employees and efficient for our farm overall. And so I am very excited about this for our dairies. I think there are certainly things that we still have to discuss in order to optimize them, but far and away, probably the top technology for this next year.
I love that. The ability to blend scientific behavior with a management heart. That's really good. And interestingly enough, in my opinion, very few dairy farmers probably think about heat stress in their baby calves or their dry cows because they don't see the impact on milk production, right? The reason we put so much time and effort on the cows is it gets hot. Oh my goodness, the bulk tank dropped. We don't ever consider, or very rarely, I'm sure, whether it's heat or it's cold, how much less did the calf drink? How much more did they move? What did that have an impact on them? So that's really interesting. So as we kind of then blend into your main area of focus and calf monitoring, a lot of the questions I get is, what are the key areas that it could even help with? What should I be thinking about? What should I be focusing on? So for you, when you're thinking about, animal wearables or not animal wearables, what are the key challenges that you're focused on today that is really one of the main areas or topics that you're having with producers?
I think I would put it into two separate buckets, one being calf health events and the other being calf stress events. And of course, the two can be related. But if we talk about health events, we all know that the two primary concerns on dairy farms are diarrhea, enteric disease, or scours. Those are probably the three different things you'll hear them called. And then bovine respiratory disease or pneumonia. Now, I always like to throw out the caveat that I am not a veterinarian. Certainly work with your vet as you work through these issues. But we do know that behaviors around these diseases are relatively conserved. So those are related to things like activity, drinking, and overall rumination. Now, similarly, in the other bucket, calf stress, you are going to see changes in those behaviors as well. But stress is obviously due more to an external environmental factor. So that could be, like I just mentioned, heat or cold stress, things like weaning, pen moves, vaccination, disbudding, all of those can lead to stress in that calf, and they will manifest that in some sort of behavioral sign as well.
So you're a genie, you get three wishes. What would be the three behaviors that you think are the most important to measure? I think you mentioned drinking and activity, but if there were, doesn't have to be three, but what do you think matters most that these wearables need to measure in order to monitor the behavior of the calves?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, activity is going to be my number one. And when I say activity, I mean standing and lying behavior, as well as lying postures. Calves spend a very conserved amount of time lying. It's also very true in dairy cows. It's somewhere around 70 to 80% of their time. And in dairy cows is about there as well. So if that calf is outside that window of time, that could indicate that something is a little bit off with her. Also in my research, we looked at the lying postures of dairy calves. I'm not sure if wearables are at this point yet, but we do know that when calves are under thermal stress, they will change their body posture in order to alleviate their heat load. Yep. So we called it sternal tucked, or basically like splayed. And not surprisingly, calves that were heat stressed spent more of their time kind of splayed out and maximizing their surface area to lose heat. So you might actually see the opposite this time of year. You expect calves to be kind of tucked in. We call it sternal tucked. And that in the future, if wearables could explore that as well, I think that would be absolutely fascinating. So that would be activity. And then second is actually going to be, I'll put them both in the bucket of like the metabolism, but they're separate. That would be drinking and rumination. Now, rumination is, of course, something that has to be present once the rumen is developed. And that's why it's not quite as important of a metric as we talk about the pre-weaning period, at least for the first half. But we do need to remember that our calves are becoming ruminants, and this early rumination behavior can be absolutely critical to ensure that that calf is getting off to a good start in her rumen development and taking off on starter intake, because that will be her primary form of nutrition pretty much as soon as we start pulling that milk away. And now on the drinking side, I think we've learned a lot from the automated feeder world, and I'm hoping we're adapting that over on the wearable side. But drinking speed, break-offs from the nipple or the bucket, and in the auto feeder world, number of visits to the auto feeder, all of those are incredibly indicative of a calf's interest in eating. I learned a term when I was doing my research that I think is probably applicable here. It's called anhedonia, and it's basically this like apathy towards eating. And it's a very clear sign that something's off with that calf. I think if we talk about what this looks like on like the farmer mindset, it's when that calf doesn't stand up to eat when you walk by with the shuttle or the bottle. And so that was something we saw quite a bit in our heat stress calves as well. I think you could definitely translate that over to an animal who is not feeling well from like an enteric side too.
Yeah, it's vigor, right? As you think about a calf, it's bright-eyed, it's bushy-tailed, it's up, it's excitable, and that's something that we can visually see. But as either our farms get larger, or as we're thinking about different labor challenges, having people who can have that cow sense or that calf sense is really difficult. And then I think the other piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's also about how early I can find that, right? And so maybe as you kind of think about either, so you mentioned the two areas, diarrhea and pneumonia. What are some of the earliest indicators or some of the things that wearables could maybe find faster than a human, just, visually, right? As we're thinking about what technology needs to allow us to do is change, right? If it gives us data, but I can't make any actionable change, it just becomes an expensive, piece of wearable. What are the things in terms of how it can find things earlier for our producers have you seen of the farms you've worked with?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there's literature yet out on the wearables on like the length of time for early detection. So I'm going to
Sure.
take it a step back to auto feeders because
Yeah.
I think that's kind of our first example. And Melissa Cantor and Joel Costa from University of Kentucky and now Vermont and Penn State, they've done a lot of research in this area. And they've found that if we use calf behavior for health detection, it can detect bovine respiratory disease up to 6 days early with 80% accuracy, and a day earlier versus clinical signs with 99% accuracy. So somewhere between 1 and 6 days early, we're able to catch that calf faster for something that is economically and welfare-based important for that calf. And so those are based kind of what I said before. It's based off of primarily drinking speed from that auto feeder. And then I think they often do a lot of time the leg loggers with those auto feeders. So that's where activity comes in. And the two combined just, man, are such a powerhouse for that early detection of calves that are maybe just a hair slower on their drinking speed. That's set based on a baseline of their, first couple of days. And they're just maybe, I would say probably lying just a hair more if I were to predict what those calves are showing. And to your point, Brandon, like those are things that maybe you can detect, like if you have your eyes on that calf 24/7, but you're not monitoring this on a proportional basis like a wearable would. And a wearable is there 24/7. Whereas I think we need to remember that even if you're the best calf manager in the world, you only have that eyes on that calf for maybe half an hour a day, maybe, probably closer to 10 to 15 minutes. And so you are getting a snapshot of what that behavior is at that time. And a calf that is not standing up to that to drink at that point has already surpassed kind of that spectrum of what a wearable could achieve.
No question. And one of the things that I've learned as we're getting our feet into this space, you talk about non-activity. So a lot of the times it's very easy to see if a calf gets up or doesn't get up or comes and eats, but it's really about that the other 23 hours, how much time is she just not doing anything and how little is she moving? We're kind of flipping it from, hey, how much is she moving to how little is she moving and making it sensitive enough so that we can see the differences. And visually, we may not see that, or we may not even think that behavior is different, or a lot of the times as we feed calves, it's very early in the morning or very late at night, so it's dark, right? There's a lot of challenges that we have as it comes to feeding and working and dealing with calves this data can allow us to make better fact-based decisions. So the next thing I wanted to get into, hey, this is great. Data's awesome, Brandon. These are usually the pushback or the feedback that I get. I don't know how to implement it. What does my team do with that? What's a step-by-step guide of, all right, now I have a list of sick calves, or I have a list of these are the animals that I need to address. What do I do with that information? So the producers that you're working with, are you building them sort of a step-by-step guide? Are you helping them with a tutorial of how to diagnose the alerts? Like, where do we go from there?
Yeah, Brandon, you hit on like the thing that's probably my primary concern with the wearables is a little bit of an oversensitivity to react when we see the alert, be it a light, be it an app alert. My primary concern is that our staff is going to see that and automatically treat that as a list of calves that need some sort of antimicrobial or even a prophylactic intervention. And I think we need to make sure that there is a little more critical thinking that is done ahead of time so that that is not the knee-jerk reaction. I think this is a little bit so far steering the ship as we, or what's the saying? we're navigating as we go.
We're building the plane as we're flying it. We're building the plane as we
Yes.
fly it.
Yes, because this is such a new technology, we don't have this like super established pipeline of, oh, yep, these farms have all tried it 20 different ways and we know this is the best. But here's what I would suggest trying first is establishing that list of calves that show up on the alert every morning and ask your team to think critically about what happened the day before. Was it a heat stress event? Was it minus 25 like it was here last week? Did we vaccinate a whole group of calves and they are the ones that are showing up on that list? If so, then we need to make sure that we are not jumping the gun with an antimicrobial treatment at that point. If that cohort has a known event that just happened to them, we need to modify it to be more of a prophylactic, like let's say they were just weaned, maybe they need some, a little bit more time being pushed up to the bunk to eat grain. Maybe we know that if it was a vaccination event, well, let's make sure that we don't disbud them today. That needs to be one window. Once they've done that critical thinking about kind of a population-wide event, then we need to do individual workups of those calves. Now, I understand that that is a big ask, especially as we grow in size and scale with some of these dairies. And the workup does not have to be super fancy, certainly work with your veterinarian to establish what the key points would be, but some to consider would be, doing some palpations of typical areas like the navel and the joints, taking a rectal temperature, looking for higher fecal scores, droopy ears. Again, talk with your veterinarian, but those are some key signs. And if they meet a certain number of criteria of checks, like, yep, she meets these signs of illness, then we follow up with a veterinarian-based antimicrobial protocol. I am hopeful that using some of that critical thinking adds some more clarity as to what each calf should be managed like, while still minimizing the total amount of time that it takes to deal with sick animals, because we know that it takes a long time to deal with animals that aren't feeling well, but it also takes a lot of time to just peruse rows of calves and figure out who needs to get the initial round of assessment.
So it's clarity for treatment with efficiency of time. I think that's really critical, and something that we've learned is it is data, it is the behavior. Why they change today, that is what we're measuring, is how is that animal today versus what she's previously done. And that doesn't always mean that there's something wrong with her, but that she changed. And what I do think it allows us to do, and what I really like that you talked about, is critically think about what is causing this behavior, right? And it also allows us on an individual basis of maybe we need to treat that calf, but what other management practices are we doing that's affecting so that these calves are having a less than optimal performance, or is moving them in the wrong direction? And that may not mean treating that calf, but it may mean changing. You mentioned before how often that we're feeding, or heat or coolness of those calves, right? So it's on an individual basis, but it can also be macro, that, okay, here's a list, now go treat everybody. That's not the case. Hopefully it allows us to pinpoint where we need to go. But maybe along with the individualness, have you been able to learn on a large scale or macro piece with your producers of what the data has been allowing you to change or think about?
Yeah, so I would also put that into two separate cohorts. I would say you have a group of dairy farmers who are very progressive when it comes to raising animals, and they are using this data exclusively for pattern observation. So again, talking about more of those macro events, when those happen, what do my heifers tell me? If we have a weaning and a pen move, do they maintain their rumination levels or do they drop? Okay, what about that specific pen of animals was different than the other 3 pens that we did before that didn't drop? So really super intentional pattern seeking. I am very excited about that from the thermal stress standpoint. I think we're going to be able to establish a lot easier, like, okay, at what temperature threshold do each farms experience changes in animal behavior? Man, is that going to be powerful. But then on the flip side, for those that are maybe more in the camp of calves are a big opportunity point for them, this system is going to allow for getting that first step of identifying calves that are unwell. if we have staff that are still kind of learning what signs of calf illness and discomfort are, this is going to be a great tool to be like, yep, her light went off. Okay, now I want to walk through with you, like, what signs does she visibly demonstrate to say that might be the case. Hopefully it will also help reduce overall calf mortality, because we are able to intervene with calves that are not doing well, that might be missed otherwise. I feel like that's kind of the baseline, but I'm very hopeful that that is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit on, for me, as I'm working with producers, it's not a one size fits all model, nor as we think about their return on investment or how it can change how they work with the calves, it can be very different from farm to farm. Some, as you mentioned, it can serve as a really good baseline for employee training and consistency around SOPs, right? Where we may not have a team that has a ton of experience or is well versed in that animal behavior, it can really help us bridge that gap and get them up to speed. Just as importantly, let's say we have a team that is really experienced, really high level. If I now give the very best calf caretaker in the world 24/7 monitoring, think how much better they can be at their job, right? So far too often people think, oh, I'm over here and I don't have a team that's good enough to use this piece of technology. Well, no, think of it as a tool that can help bring their level up. And then I have people over here that say, man, my team is so good, I'm not even sure they're going to learn anything from it. Yeah, or how can we get them even better, right? And what does that relate to and what does it mean? And I also think the last thing I always want to stress is, just because I put a wearable on the calf doesn't change a thing of its health, right? We then need to take that data and we need to change what we're doing, as well as more and more and more what I'm seeing as we talk about progressive herds. When I can put a piece of technology into the very best versus a farm that says has a bunch of calf issues, the very best is always going to outperform and they're going to get more out of that piece of technology. And I think sometimes we struggle because the people who may be interested are the ones that are having issues, right? They're saying, man, I'm having calf issues. Could this piece of technology help? But then there's not other management changes. So they put the data in, they put the wearable in, and I still have a lot of calves dying. Bethany, what's going on, right? So it's some of those challenges that we're working with that I really like to hear you talk about, the difference between pattern observation and opportunity point. I think that's really, really important. So
it's one thing I want to add too is I mentioned Dr. Costa before. He did a webinar with Cora Akama from Michigan State at the time. And he had I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but he had a quote that I think of all the time. And it was essentially like, don't fall to the level of your technology, let it meet you at your gaps. And so to that end, we cannot use this technology or any other technology as a crutch to solve all of our problems. It still takes immense critical thinking, either from you as the farm owner or a farm manager or your employees, to do right by the calf and still understand that they are a biological being. And just because you have a binary yes, no, light or alert, they still need individual care and your brain fully on in order to use that technology to the fullest.
Yeah, we can't create robots. The very best system is we still have common sense, critical thinking, real world experience combined with the data to be able to apply it on farm. I love how you put that. Don't utilize it as a crutch. So as you think about, again, I'll go back to, you feel confident. The data is awesome. It's giving us so much more information than we had previously. What about real change? So the producers you're working with, and not all of them have wearables, but in the examples that you've seen, what are some maybe real world outcomes? So you mentioned hopefully less mortality. As producers are considering investing in calf monitoring, what are the ROI kind of key benchmarks that they should be thinking about that can make them money, not only on a today, but down the line as that calf is an investment for the lifetime of that animal?
Yeah, so I mean, I will challenge you, Brandon. I think that is the one area that we need a little more information on from the wearable companies is where are those ROI, where are those ROI opportunities? Because when the system first goes in, I could actually see it being a little bit of a sticker shock almost from increased treatment rates, just because we are
100%.
detecting more of those subtle changes, more of those subclinical signs, which is important. It's not like we should be ignoring them and not treating, but there could be a little bit of that initial sticker shock. I think first and foremost, the biggest ROI is going to be that time-saving feature, though. I had heard somewhere else in a podcast that labor continues to be a concern. I would say I actually often hear of farms maintaining a relatively stable workforce, but we can't deny that there are still going to be areas where labor is a challenge, be that the current policy reform, be that, areas where labor is challenging to find because of weather or whatever. If you do not have enough labor to properly monitor your calves in the quote old-fashioned way, this technology might become a requirement. And even if it's not, labor being the most expensive entity on our operation, anything that we can do to save a little bit of time in how we manage our calves while still giving them the proper amount of care is key. So I don't know if many producers think this way, and if they don't, I encourage them to, is to think about how many minutes per calf you're spending on them each day. So for my home dairy, it's about 6 minutes per calf per feeding. So that's twice a day. And it's very easy to then back calculate that math, the hourly wage of your employees, the number of employees you have feeding, that's your base cost. So think about how much even just cutting off a minute from each calf per day would be. And again, I'm not sure what that percent shaving would be from a wearable technology, but I would probably put it in somewhere in that minute range. That's my challenge for you, Brandon, is to come up with that minute number. But that certainly does add up. So that's certainly ROI number one for me. I think other things that we might see more on the calf side, if with earlier intervention, we should hopefully be able to have our treatment protocol be especially effective because we're hitting it before an issue becomes systemic. So that should hopefully both make the calf health improve, but also maybe reduce the need for a retreat. And then kind of taking this cumulatively, I think there is potential for this to be beneficial for overall calf comfort and welfare. Again, because we don't have our eyes on every single calf every single day, we can maybe detect more subtle signs of a calf that is not feeling well and return her to a state of well-being in a faster manner, which doesn't necessarily have the dollars and cents behind it, but is very important for a lot of the farms that I talk with, and also important for the social license of dairy farming.
Absolutely. And if I can go back to, I completely agree. There may be a sticker shock of, as I think about some of the initial biggest challenges with any monitoring system, is all of a sudden I'm getting this data and these alerts, and I'm finding more animals than I most likely did before. Not always, but typically pushback is I have more alerts than I would have found visually. So first off, that doesn't mean we blindly go and treat them. And then two, as we think about, can we change from being proactive rather than reactive? And maybe we find and treat or address more animals initially, but can that, as you put it, increase the effectiveness of that treatment? Can we reduce the overall amount of retreats that we have? And then, as I also, what's interesting about calves, cows, as it relates to monitoring, we have an initial response, right? In terms of, we know what that performance is going to be. If we get them through the dry cow and the transition period better, they are healthy and they're doing well, they get pregnant and they're high producing. Awesome. Calves, this is a long-term investment. And as we think about getting that calf to her full potential, what wearables could do in terms of the end return on investment, that's something we're going to need some time and some learning with. But boy, as we think about how critical and how vulnerable that calf is early on, if I can use data to be more effective, to have a healthier calf and a more comfortable calf, I guarantee she's going to be a higher producing, more profitable animal for my herd, which I think is really critical.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point. And I think dairy farmers are becoming more and more aware of this, that investing in your young stock pays dividends as lactating cows. My training is as a mammary physiologist first and foremost, and we know that early life programming of the mammary gland and even outside of my scope, the rumen, both of those things, like just set that animal up for complete success later on. And one thing that I want to point out too specifically, that I'm excited about with this monitoring is bovine respiratory disease detection. So Dr. Terry Olivet is probably one of the primary experts in the field here, and she likes to describe calves as, being a prey animal. They are not going to outwardly display signs of illness until they absolutely have to, because that's a sign of weakness and getting picked off by predators. And so what that means is oftentimes our pneumonias are going to be subclinical for a long time before they're clinical. Now, one of the tools that they use is lung ultrasounds, an absolutely fantastic tool, probably our best way for detecting pneumonia. But again, that is not 24/7 monitoring. And so hopefully by having this behavior assessment, we can also pick up a little bit early some respiratory disease, which is a huge player in survivability for our dairy heifers. So when we talk about that long-term impact, man, if we can detect something that has a binary outcome of so long, see you later, you're culled, versus keeping you in the herd because I detected your pneumonia early and I nipped it in the bud, wow, that could be very impactful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's as we think about BRD, that's a really good point. And even as I think about subclinical issues, again, a challenge that we face is we're alerting our producers, whether it's on the cows or the cat, this animal looks fine, and we don't want to overtreat. So it's getting that right balance of how do I find them early, and sometimes before they're even showing signs, so they never become have a clinical case, but also understanding the tools of what are the signs, when we need to act, and how we need to act, and that's really where at Select Sires Member Cooperative, where our specialists really come into play, is helping our team dissect and implement the data. I talk about all the time, you have to make it actionable and executable every single day, right? Across our team members. We need to know what this means, how we use it, and we go and make a change. Because if we don't take the data and make a meaningful change to our high level or individual calf management, then it was just an expensive piece of a wearable, and that's not what we want to have happen. Which there's so much potential that's out there that I'm excited for, right? So as we're kind of wrapping up here, we have a lot of dairy producers that are really interested in CowManager and other wearables. If you were in their seat and they were considering this technology, what questions should they be asking in terms of what's right for them, or what questions should they be thinking about if they're looking into calf monitoring?
Yes. I'm going to throw a philosophy at you from one of my favorite podcasters. Her name is Kendra Adachi, and her tagline is the lazy genius. So being a genius about the things that matter and lazy about the things that don't. And one of her main philosophies is establishing priorities. So again, we can't let that technology just meet us wherever. We need to have a priority when we're implementing something new. So we need to think critically as a dairy farmer about, okay, if I'm investing in this, what is the top priority that this is going to address and solve? So again, it could be any of the many things that we just talked about. Maybe it's labor efficiency. Maybe it's a whole host of subclinical or clinical signs of disease. Maybe it's weaning train wreck and a big old weaning slump when calves are done. I think we've discussed that all of these issues can be addressed through activity monitoring. And so we need to make sure that when that program is implemented, that is the primary objective that we are first focusing on. Then we can address some of the other things that might matter to us, just not quite at that forefront, because again, because the system is so robust, it can help in a lot of different areas. The other thing that I would suggest dairy farmers do is what kind of you just mentioned, Brandon, is identify who is on your team, both within your dairy farm and externally, that is going to support you through this. So that would certainly be your staff, making sure that they all have that buy-in and they're on the same page. But then externally, whoever your tag supplier is, whoever your veterinarian is, whoever your dairy nutritionist and calf nutritionist is, they need to be aware that this technology is coming. And especially if you can tell them what your expectations are of them in filling roles of data analysis, interpretation, execution, all of that's going to be critical. As a data nerd, if a farm came to me and said, like, hey, I'm putting these wearables in, can you look at the data every month? I would be like, heck yes, please.
Yeah.
But if you have someone on your team who isn't best suited for that seat on the bus, know that. And maybe it's finding someone new to help fill that role, or just making sure there's someone on your team who can do that. Because like you said, Brandon, if we generate all this data and don't do anything with it, then what's the point? And I know that that can be overwhelming. And that's why relying on a team is important.
3 takeaways. I think I only need one. It's be a lazy genius, right? And I'll always go back to the sort of the hedgehog model of focus on what truly matters, right? Start there, low hanging fruit, and build your way up. Build a base, understand what we're doing, work within that team to establish priorities, and then expand from on there. And the opportunities are endless, but far too often we get lost out in space and we don't really focus on here's what matters most, and here's what matters most on your specific farm, and then getting everyone engaged in the process, right? I can put a wearable in at any farm, and if I don't get buy-in, and if I don't get true ownership from the people that are working with the cows or working with the calves, it's dead, right? It's never going to work. And as excited as you are to be a data junkie, if one of your producers doesn't embrace and make changes, then the data is just in na-na land. And so I think that's a fantastic sort of end to what we've learned today. And I've taken so much away, and I just really appreciate taking your time and your expertise, as I think this is really just a beginning point here as we think about the bell-shaped curve of implementation and technology. We've gone a long way as it relates to the milking cow herd and dry cows, but calves, we're still really revving up. And so I think to be on the front end of understanding it and implementing it and making sure it's right for our producers is really critical. Where could people maybe learn a little bit more? I know you're super active on LinkedIn and Instagram. Maybe kind of share some of that with the folks so they can continue to keep learning from you.
Yeah. So Brandon, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that your word of the year was curiosity. My word of the year last year was intentionality. And it is my number one, it's my motto, my go forward as a dairy consultant is we just need such intentionality as we work with animals. It can get so easy to get lost in the milieu of daily labor and putting out fires, but investing in something like this, we need such intentionality in how we're addressing what the data is telling us and how we are going about solving it. And so take out that external noise of what other dairies are doing, what your day-to-day grind is as you think about something important like this and how it would fit in the intentional operation of your farm. As for learning more about me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Bethany Dado-Senn, or I'm also on Instagram as Lactation Sensation. I really enjoy, like I said, blending the science and the day-to-day management, both as the consultant and as a member of my family's dairy. And so you'll get a kind of a combination of all of that stuff. On the Vita Plus front, we have a Starting Strong blog, so that can be found at vitaplus.com. And if you're in the Midwest and considering using wearable technology, I would love to be a part of your team.
That's awesome. Intentionality. I'm gonna add that in because that's really powerful.
Nope, this is my first year. I hosted a whole party. So my word of the year this year is time. So that's in the middle. And then calves, ventilation matters. Today's consumption, tomorrow's production.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for taking the time to join us. I know you're extremely busy, and this was fantastic. I really appreciate it.